Why don't we just go ahead and get started? Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Jenkins, and I am the Chief Science Officer at Rubicon Carbon. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by the distinguished members of our science team, and we'll be talking about the public launch of our Rubicon Carbon Integrity Framework. The Integrity Framework, or the RCIF, is a tool that we use to evaluate and assign a numerical score to the different aspects of risk that are inherent to carbon projects. We've used this framework internally for some time, but we're now making it available to you, the public. So the integrity framework, what is it? It's core to how we operate at Rubicon. And we really believe it's one of the things that makes us unique. For those who may be unfamiliar with Rubicon, we build and sell diversified portfolios of carbon credits that are called Rubicon Carbon Tons, or RCTs. By bundling carbon credits into curated portfolios and allowing clients to build customized portfolios of credits based on our inventory, we help buyers to reduce risk and while also driving catalytic finance for climate action. And now we're an off-taker and we hold these credits on our balance sheet. And so it behooves us to procure only the highest quality credits. We share risk with our customers. And we initially developed this internal framework to guide our own process of buying credits across the varied sort of carbon landscape. So we wrote it, we prepared it, we created it from the perspective of a credit buyer who needs to navigate the key risks inherent in those carbon projects. And so, it's important to remember that there are risks inherent in any project. And so the RCIF is intended to help a buyer, whether it's us or someone else, to understand and quantify the nature and the magnitude of those risks for a given project. And the RCIF is really how we report the results of our diligence process for the ex post credits, and ex post means already issued, that make up our RCTs. So that's what the RCIF is. Welcome to our webinar describing it. So what I'll do next is introduce you to the team responsible for developing the framework. And so with me today, I have Kim Dubose, who's the Director of Science and Sustainability Operations. I have Dr. Nan Pond, who's the Vice President of Nature-Based Research and Monitoring. I have Amishi Claros, who heads up Industrial and CDR Research for Rubicon. And I have Dr. Brian Clough, who's the Research Director for Rubicon. So without further ado, oh, and I forgot to change my slides. Sorry, you guys. These are the folks. You see them on the screen, and now you see them on the slide. So Kim, let's start by having you explain why we've decided to disclose the integrity framework and to talk about it publicly.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So as many of you probably know, the VCM, it has been and continues to be a subject of debate within the environmental community. Much of the discussion has been centered around integrity and quality of carbon credits. So given this, we at Rubicon Carbon, we felt it was important to share our framework to help address questions that we might receive about the quality of the credits in our inventory, and also to contribute to public discourse by helping set benchmarks for what buyers and sellers want to use to evaluate the quality of carbon avoidance and removals projects. In addition to that, jurisdictions worldwide, we're seeing that they're beginning to request that carbon credit buyers make more public disclosures about crucial information regarding their purchases and their offsetting activities. So by making more of our evaluation criteria and processes public, we're helping our clients ensure that their sustainability efforts are compliant. Jen, back to you.
Okay, exactly. Thanks, Kim. So let's just go ahead and talk about the framework, starting with the 5 pillars that make it up, and we call these sub-scores. And so with, overall, these sub-scores are rolled up into an overall RCIF score for each project, but we do break it down first. And so the sub-scores that we use are climate impact, additionality, certification, principal durability, and then future delivery risk. And we'll talk about each one of these in turn. But I should also point out that the overall top level score for each project is kind of a weighted average of the subscores. So the weight we apply to each subscore as we're rolling up the subscores into the final score, it does change depending on the project type. So Amishi, why don't you kick it off and talk about how we evaluate climate impact?
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so in essence, the climate impact subscore looks at how well the carbon avoidance or the removal project delivers on its expected climate impact. So to evaluate this, we look at two main factors, one being claim effectiveness and the other being carbon accounting. We use various tools to ensure claim effectiveness. That includes geospatial approaches for nature-based projects and broadly life cycle assessments based off the latest scientific literature. We also engage directly with the project developers, which I find to be very helpful because that helps eliminate any ambiguity that might raise questions about like a project's climate impact. So we can directly engage with the project developer and get additional information. Then to evaluate carbon accounting, we conduct independent analyses of each credit by the project and vintage using geospatial monitoring where applicable, like for nature-based projects, and by replicating the assumptions they made in the project methodologies and the calculations. What's more is we also offer an optional risk adjustment feature through which Rubicon Carbon financially backs the integrity of its projects. So based off our credit accounting assessment, buyers can over-retire credits to right-size their climate impact. Choosing this option is reflected in an increase in this climate impact subscore. I'll hand it over to you, Kim.
Thanks. I'll now discuss additionality and how we score that subscore, which additionality commonly refers to whether a project's climate impact is still likely to have occurred in the absence of the carbon project being set up around the project activities. At Rubicon, all credits that we procure and evaluate must have legal additionality as a base requirement. So that means that the project's activities were not required under any locally applicable laws or regulations. And then after that, to evaluate the project's additionality score under the RCIF, we examine two other features. First is whether the activities are part of local standard practice or common practice. And then second, whether there's evidence that the project activities would not have occurred in the absence of carbon revenues. So this is the financial additionality assessment, and it includes reviewing other revenue streams coming into the project, such as product sales or subsidy support. So for example, a reforestation project that aims to plant commercial timber species such as eucalyptus or pine in a region that already has an established and thriving forest products market and supply chain is unlikely to achieve a high additionality score because it would appear that that project, its activities represent common practice behavior in the region. So one, it's already common practice, and two, it's likely that the project developer could achieve or receive other kind of forest sector specific financing that would be available to motivate the establishment of that forest in that region. So with that, I'll hand it over to Brian to talk about our certification score.
Cool. Hi, everybody. So basically the certification score deals with how well the project is designed, implemented, and managed. So there's a few components that go into this score: ongoing operations and project track record, the quality of the data that's being used within the project, aspects of the registry, and the quality of the underlying methodology. And then also we capture social and environmental risk under this subscore as well. So for ongoing operations and project track record, we look at things like the project's compliance with verification updates, responsiveness to questions about the projects, etc. Where we're talking about data quality, we're looking to see that the project provides sufficient high quality data so that independent assessments of the project's claims can be made. And then where registries and methodologies are concerned, we're looking at both the quality of the project methodology, whether it's sufficiently robust, as well as any issues with the registry of the credits and certification of the credits that could impact the project's integrity. And then lastly, for social environmental risks, we're doing kind of a deep dive into the risks that are presented for local communities, and especially looking at how these risks are being mitigated to kind of minimize their impact. So I'll pass it over to Nan now to talk about principled durability.
Thanks, Brian. Principled durability is sort of our contribution to the idea of project permanence, which is often also discussed as durability. So we've defined this concept of principled durability, which is how long a project is likely to retain carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And we consider this to be determined by two factors, operational sustainment and biophysical durability. So operational sustainment refers to our assessment of a project developer's ability to maintain the carbon stored for the projected project duration. For example, if a project has 40-year length and it's been underway for 10 years already, we give that a higher operational durability score than a 40-year project that's on its first year. So we are trying to credit projects or account for projects that have a long-standing track record and are continually delivering on the promises that they're making. The biophysical durability concept refers to the geological or biological residence time of carbon in different pools that are impacted by the project activities. So this will vary by project type, including terrestrial forests, mangrove systems, enhanced rock weathering, direct air capture. These get a range of scores, and different nature-based projects will get different scores depending on sort of where within the planet they are and the rates of carbon cycling in those regions. And then the other thing that we note here is that some projects just have a far longer storage time. So a project injecting carbon into a geological formation with an expected storage of 1,000 years has far higher biophysical durability than a reforestation project, even a long one, which might not be able to offer any guarantees beyond its contract length.
Yeah, thanks. Principled durability is one of the hardest things that we sort of had to wrap our minds around, right, as we were developing this framework. And so we spent a lot of time figuring it out and thinking about what the different project types and sort of what it all means. Why don't you, I guess, yeah, there was one other, before we start talking about future delivery risk, I wondered if, Nan, you could just talk a little bit about how we measure the durability of our super pollutant elimination projects. How do we handle principled durability in those situations?
Sure. So the super pollutant elimination category are projects where we're actually often not looking at CO2 at all, but other high warming potential gases and sort of the elimination of those emissions or destruction of those gases. So we consider the durability in those projects to be effectively permanent. And as such, we just don't include principled durability in the final calculations of the integrity score for that project type.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about our last subscore, which is how we handle future delivery risk. So this subscore really evaluates what are the risks to this project in terms of whether it will deliver its future tons, right? And so this is based on both geopolitical context and sort of the climate context or climate resiliency. And so we assess a credit's future delivery risk by looking at the likelihood of shifts, positive or negative, in terms of government regulations and societal factors, including the governance of carbon markets and community engagement in projects. We also look at political environment. We use global data sets to sort of track and measure expected changes or, any shifts in political stability. In terms of climate resilience, we look at the risk to a project's longevity and durability of stored carbon by looking at the risk of natural disturbances. And this includes droughts, floods, wildfires, and sea level rise, which, as we all know, are expected to get worse, not better, as the climate continues to change. And this assessment is sort of conducted globally. We use climate change models and look at whether project developers are taking steps to evaluate and mitigate those future losses, potential future losses. So that's the future delivery risk subscore. And now that we've gotten through all the subscores, what I'll do is sort of we'll take a look at how does this work? How does this all come together? And we're going to walk through a fictional mangrove restoration project in Brazil. We'll call it Costa Azul. And so, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about the project?
Yes. So the Costa Azul project, it was established in 2014 by a local environmental group that wanted to restore Brazil's unique coastal mangroves. So the project is based in an area where these coastal habitats had previously, been intact, but were destroyed by aquaculture, shrimp farming. And the mangrove forests, they're not coming back naturally via natural regeneration. So this environmental group is working to restore these coastal mangrove habitats. Let's now examine each of the subscores, starting with climate impact. So over to you, Amishi.
Yeah, so we gave this guy a 98 out of 100 for climate impact. So now it's in its 10th year. We can evaluate the project's climate impact using geospatial monitoring to see that the saplings planted in 2014 are effectively storing carbon and growing. The project also uses a regional biological model to predict growth rates and carbon storage, which are superior to just general models. However, the project lost a couple points because the developers used this conservative but generalized soil organic carbon storage estimate instead of using a more regional specific data for their baseline. So they got docked a couple points there. Additionally, while geospatial monitoring is employed, the limited temporal coverage during the establishment stage reduces that confidence in the growth rate of newly planted mangroves. We'd want to see a dense sampling to have high confidence that those newly planted mangroves are meeting expected growth rates. Kim, back to you if you can speak to additionality.
Yes, so this project receives a 100 out of 100 points for additionality. And that's because, well, first, there were no local laws, regulations, or policies in place that were either incentivizing or requiring the restoration effort. Second, as mentioned in the introduction, the area has experienced pretty significant land conversion and coastal mangrove habitat destruction because of the aquaculture shrimp farming industry. And then third, the project has no funding or other revenue streams other than from the sale of carbon credits. In addition to that, satellite imagery shows that kind of similar land plots in the area remain cleared and degraded after serving the shrimp industry for some time. So if the project weren't present on the site, the mangroves or other vegetation, they wouldn't come back and grow back on their own. You need active restoration in order to restore the area. I'll pass it over to Brian now to talk about certification score.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so where certification is concerned, we have a somewhat lower, but still fairly high score of 88 out of 100. And, I mean, generally still looking pretty good, mainly because this project does use a really well-founded and respected methodology for seagrass restoration projects, Vera's VM33 methodology. But then, the biggest issue here is simply just a lack of more recent monitoring data. Some data sets, that exist from the project area from 2021, but nothing more recently than that. So, to really score a project very high for certification, we're looking for that really consistent monitoring cadence on the right basis, at least an annual basis. So that's the kind of the rationale for the score there. And I'll kick it over to Nan now to talk about the principal durability score.
Thanks, Brian. So this project scores 73 out of 100 for principal durability. So as I mentioned earlier, the principal durability scope score reflects both operational sustainment and biophysical durability. So for operational sustainment, we compute a score based on the project's 60-year commitment and then 10-year track record. So as mentioned before, the success of an established project is seen as an indicator of ongoing commitment and support for a project. So this project's calculated score reflects that. The project has a relatively lower score for biophysical durability, so that component of this subscore. And that's just because of the temporary nature of carbon storage in woody biomass, and particularly the high rate of carbon cycling in tropical coastal systems. So overall, the project score of 73 is still on the higher end for nature-based projects, but this is a relatively lower principal durability within nature-based compared to more durable forms of carbon storage like biochar or a tech-based removal solution.
Awesome. Thank you. So the last subscore for Costa Azul is future delivery risk. And so we've rated this one at a 71 out of 100. So there you go. Future delivery risks for nature-based projects are always higher than for engineered removals, right? Because the nature-based projects are just exposed to natural disturbances and changing management practices, right? That's just kind of a fact. But, nevertheless, this project is restoring an arid mangrove system that's less prone to extreme environmental changes than other coastal ecosystems might be. So it got, there's a balance there. At the same time, there are still some geopolitical risks, right? Pending national legislation could negatively impact existing carbon projects. And, in Brazil, we know that the government's ability to enforce land use, frankly, remains kind of suspect. So overall, are the different subscores for this project, right? Oh, here we go. Computed up to an 88%, which we graded as an A in our book. We believe this project overall is very high quality, but we also want to be transparent and have our clients understand that, like all projects, it does have risks. So so that's Costa Azul. Hopefully we've given you a clear sense of how the various subscores are computed and what goes into them and how they're rolled up into the overall score. At the end of the day, right, we've hopefully been able to walk you through the various subscores and give you a sense for how we do this evaluation and the data that go into it. So each project in our RCT portfolios does receive an overall RCIF score that has, comprises the different subscores that we've talked about today. If you're a Rubicon Carbon client, you can view the overall score and the various subscores of each project in our inventory through our online platform and our customer portal. And you can compare them with each other to make informed decisions about the credits that you want to purchase and put in your portfolio. We update the subscores, of course, and keep them up to date as new information becomes available. Ultimately, over the long term, what we'd like to do is be able to expand some of these criteria beyond just looking at carbon by capturing additional benefits that are created by carbon projects, right? Including things like biodiversity, air and water quality, social impact, et cetera, once we feel confident in our ability to measure those benefits, right, using scientifically sound methods. So in the end, if you're a buyer and you want to learn more about how we evaluate these projects, or if you just want to learn more about the RCIF and you're not a buyer, please go ahead and contact us via our website, via LinkedIn. Really, thanks a lot for your time and attention here. And before we go, what I'd like to do is just sort of run through a few questions and answers that we've heard from, various folks in our network as we have been talking about the RCIF and presenting it to customers and clients. So I'm going to stop sharing here and we'll get back to everyone. Just get back to everyone on the screen. And so a first question, one that we've heard and probably would be good for us to answer is, why do we do this, right? There are a lot of agencies out there, a lot of organizations that have their own ratings and scores. There's ratings agencies. Why did Rubicon want to make a new one? And are our scores that we're giving to these projects reasonably consistent with what we've learned from the ratings agencies? I think Nan, can you take that one?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I guess to start, I'd say we think the RCIF is unique because it was developed in this really applied way by a carbon credit buyer, Rubicon Carbon, for other carbon credit buyers. And because of where we sit kind of within the VCM ecosystem, We're focused on quantifying risks and balancing them across portfolios of carbon credits. But we're also very much focused on actually making purchases, right? So it's not that we are looking to find reasons not to buy credits, but we're looking to holistically understand the strengths and weaknesses of each project that we look at, and ultimately to enable engagement in this market. So we wanted a system designed to let buyers do that same kind of assessment and make those informed purchasing decisions. And then I think the second part of that question was whether our scores are consistent with what ratings agencies are saying. And obviously there are many different ratings agencies out there that are, some of whom we make use of their data, some of them we don't. But from what I know, right, and what I've seen over time, our scores are generally consistent, like correlated with what ratings agencies are saying. But we certainly don't align all the time, and they don't align with one another all the time either. Our subscores are also different from the subscores that different ratings agencies use. Everyone has taken their own lens to understand how to quantify the integrity of carbon credits. And so hopefully this webinar gives people an understanding of the lens that Rubicon Carbon has used. And then also the ability to pull out subscores that maybe align more or less with their values. So if it's durability that's really important, or carbon accounting that drives decision making, buyers can choose to make use of some or just part of the RCIF to enable their decision making.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. We definitely use the data, and our approach works for us, right? And it works. We believe it should work for our buyers, and this is the framework that we use to evaluate projects. Yeah. Okay, so Kim, I think the next question is for you, and it's sort of how, we talked a little bit about accessing on the customer portal, but talk a little bit more about how a buyer or somebody could see our scores.
Sure. Yeah, all of our scores, or the RCIF scores for all of the projects that are in our portfolios, they're accessible to our customers that have been invited to the Rubicon Carbon customer web portal. So we have a kind of internal site with a login, and you can log in there and see all of the details of how we scored the project, along with commentary from our analysts, which we call our analyst insights, photos of the project, maps, etc. We also monitor all of our projects on a regular basis, and update the scores and our analyst insights on a regular cadence, and in between that cadence when there are material changes. And so that way our buyers, they know what we know about a project from the point when they make their initial purchase all the way through to the point when they choose to retire those credits. So if you're interested in getting onboarded to our platform, reach out to one of us, one of our sales colleagues, and we can talk to you about getting that process started.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And the sales colleagues can also tell you more about our buy and hold feature, which is super relevant to what you were just talking about. Yeah. I think the other, Amishi, you talked a little bit about risk adjustment when you were talking about climate impact. I wondered if you could talk about how risk adjustment works and how it might sort of change the subscores and maybe even the overall score for a particular project if risk adjustment is taken up as an option.
Yeah, it's a feature that I think is so awesome that we do. So, right, like we redo that whole credit accounting, we redo the calculations for nature-based, like, the curve, the carbon curve. So we will redo that, and then we'll figure out, if there is overcrediting present in the project. So if there's overcrediting present in the project, you can do this risk adjustment feature and then overcredit, so you right size your climate impact. We will, retire those credits on just generally, and you can claim what we view to be scientifically the accurate climate impact. When you do that feature, your climate impact score can go up. That can influence your overall integrity score, right? You could maybe go from like a very high B to a very low A, but you can't go from like a C to an A. And that's, I think, a really core belief. We think this over-retirement feature that we've talked about, we have white papers on, really affects the climate impact that you're measuring, you can't over retire for an additionality risk, right? Or a certification risk. Retiring more of that credit doesn't make it more additional. So I think that's like a very interesting constraint that we've put on the projects, but I believe it is a lot more accurate in what you are correcting for in the case of the VCM, and addressing, you know, issues that we know are present, and we're being really pragmatic about our solutions. So yeah, you can increase your score, but there's a limit to how much you can increase.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, thanks. I think that concludes today's introduction to the Rubicon Carbon Integrity Framework. Thanks to Nan and Brian and Kim and Amishi for being here and presenting this and creating this framework, right? And presenting it to us today. And thanks to everyone who joined us. And with that, we will call it a day. Thank you so much.